So welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee meeting being held on Tuesday the 28th of January 2025. For those present in the room, if the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website, and the meeting is being streamed live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel, and we are making a recording. Others are permitted to film, photograph and record public meetings, provided that it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If there are any members of the public present who do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please raise your hand. There are no members of the public present, so we're all right there. For participants in the room, please raise your hand to indicate you wish to contribute. When invited to speak, please press the button on the right of the microphone unit and speak directly towards the microphone. Please remember to turn your microphone off once you have finished speaking. Please ensure that mobile phones, laptops and other devices are turned to silent. For participants in attendance remotely, this is particularly for Frank, can I request that you use the raise hand feature within the system if you wish to contribute and to introduce yourself when called upon. Please note that only committee members present in the meeting room may vote, so Frank, unfortunately you can't vote on this occasion. Just a welcome to others who are at this meeting today. Councillor Peter Stoddart. Peter, thank you for coming for this. Particularly interested in risks within the council. Councillor Harvey is here as well. Thank you, Councillor Harvey. And the officers, Rachel Sanders, Jonathan Nelson is attending remotely. Deborah Nixon is not here with us today. Sean Connor, Carrie, Christopher, Sarah Halliwell and Zoe Richards are all in the room. Grace Hawkins, the auditor, is there. Thank you, Grace, for coming. Amy, you're with us here. And James Cook. James, thank you for coming to this meeting. I presume just for the first item, but you're more than welcome to stay as long as you wish. Thank you for your attendance. Okay, thank you. So item one, have any apologies been notified to the clerk?
Yes, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillor Peter Hamblin.
Thank you. Have any name substitutes been notified?
No name substitutes, Chair.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Do members have any interest to declare on the items in the agenda? This applies to those voting members. Nobody anything to declare. Thank you. Item 4. The minutes of the meeting held on 29th of October are included in the agenda for approval. No matters of accuracy have been notified to the monitoring officer. Are you content that I sign the minutes as an accurate record? Show of hands, please. Thank you. There are no questions from councillors and no questions from members of the public. So we move on to the first substantive item, which is the Code of Conduct for Councillors. We receive this update every 6 months, and the present presenter is Sean O'Connor. Sean, thank you. James, if you want to speak to this item, then we'd be delighted to have your input. Pat, I don't know whether you want to. Well, we'll see when you want to.
Thank you, Chair. This is, as you said, this report starts on page 16 of your pack. It is the 6-monthly update to this panel on how we've operated the Code of Conduct over the past 6 months. So it's the update till September 24. We do have one of our independent persons, James Cook's, in attendance, who, if you could see after the first part whether or not James wishes to add anything to that would be much appreciated, Chair. The second part of the report concerns the Council's response to the government's consultation on standards. So I'll report by exception on the first part, which is the noting part of the report. So I won't go through and repeat everything, and I'll just flag the points which I thought are probably important to bring to the committee's attention. And then we'll pause for questions and then perhaps move on to the consultation, Chair. So the first part is in relation to the number of complaints. So we have seen a reduction. We've had 24 in the first 6 months. 21 of those in relation to parish and town councils and 3 in relation to Herefordshire Council. We've seen a reduction from last year, and we're kind of hoping that we see a standard or normal level of complaints, and it isn't like it was last year where we had substantially more. What is quite positive, there are only 3 complaints against councillors at Herefordshire, so that is good. But I would remind the committee, a bit of context, we have 53 Herefordshire councillors and 1,300 parish councillors, so having only 24 complaints is pretty good. The second point I would like to raise is the source of the complaint. So, which are positive, is that over half of complaints are raised by residents, and there are no complaints raised by members of Herefordshire Council or officers. Unfortunately, 46% of complaints have been raised by parish, town and city councillors. And if we look at paragraph 13 and the figure in paragraph 13, which I've just lost. This gives a breakdown of what we've actually done with these complaints over the last 2 years. So this only relates to the parish and town councillor complaints, and you'll see in 23-24 only two of the complaints actually went to investigation. This year we've had 11 complaints by a parish councillor about another parish councillor, and none of them have got any further than the initial investigation. So the section where we take in the complaint and see if it actually has any merit to it. All 11 complaints have been resolved at that stage as having no merit or not in the public interest to take that any further. This has actually raised something within the department of why is this happening? Why are we receiving so many complaints which have so little merit? And we have seen some evidence of councillors and councils not actually trying to resolve any complaints locally, and actually some of the councils simply see the monitoring officer stage as being another stage in the complaints process, and sometimes it's almost a race who can refer the other councillor to the monitoring officer first. It's unfortunate, and it has a financial cost, because even though they are relatively resolved early on in the process, of course that has a financial consequence to that. Whilst we've been looking at this, obviously we're aware of the civility and respect pledge that's been championed by the likes of NALC and the SLCC, so that's the Society of Local Council Clerks. And we have contacted the National Association for NALC to see if they had any further information about this pledge. Now, this pledge kind of promotes civility and respect, as it says on the box. But part of that is also to try to have an early resolution and to try to ensure that these issues don't go any further. Try to resolve it at that early stage. We have had a reply back from NALC, who have advised us that in Herefordshire that only 7 parish, town and city councils, which is 4%, have actually signed up to this pledge. NALC weren't entirely sure why it was so low. It's the second lowest in the country, and they weren't clear on that. And we did agree that after this meeting that they were going to speak to the local association, and we would look at what activities happened before today to see what has been done and why there is such a low uptake. And it's certainly something that what we agreed with the National Association is that we would consider this point and see what we could do as possibly as a council to assist in that. In a way, that would be helping ourselves, because if we are trying to reduce the number of complaints which come through to ourselves, then of course that's a benefit to this council as well. To try and get a bit more information about this, we've changed our code of conduct form, so the form that needs to be completed when someone wishes to raise a code of conduct complaint, to try and gain more information about, for these councillor and councillor complaints, whether or not any form of local resolution has been attempted, and and what has happened, just so we can just get a bit more information about that and see, you know, which of the councils are trying to resolve these without involving us as the principal authority or the monitoring officer. So in relation to Figure C and Appendix 1, which is where the complaints are located, we have seen increases in this 6 months on Ross and Y Town Council, Homer and Shelwick and Cornwall. Rather pleasingly, we've seen no complaints for Barter Street with Lugwardine, which is very good news. And likewise, Walford and Llangaran, which historically have had higher levels of complaints, they have been reduced. So that is some good news. In relation to the type of complaints, these are mainly around disrespect. So we've had this theme in the last few meetings. The majority of the complaints are around, well, disrespect, I should say, rather than or a lack of respect, and the non-declaring of personal interest. So that hasn't changed in the last 6 months. Of the outcomes for the 24 matters that are referred to us, 21 of them were resolved at initial assessment stage. 1 was referred for further investigation and is ongoing, and 2 are currently on hold as they're being looked at by other authorities. In relation to our key performance indicators, as I've explained in the last few meetings, we are developing those as we go along. So in regards to paragraph 35, which is the time from receipt to an initial assessment decision, that is now down to 22 days, which sounds a long time, but actually it isn't when you take into consideration that we receive the complaint, we have to contact the parties, we have to seek out what their views are on the complaint, and then come to a judgment. So what we are seeing within paragraph 35 is that is our kind of standard level now. So that's what we can, around about 20 days it was what we considered to be a good turnaround. The time for the independent person response, so on average in the last 6 months that has been 2 days, so that's considered to be exceptional. So but by the time we produce a report, it's sent to the 2 independent persons. They consider the report, review it and give their comments. On average that is 2 days, so clearly they are going above and beyond what we would expect. So thank you very much for that. We've had one investigation, only one investigation during the committee, during the 6 months, which is in paragraph 37 with, let me just get the time, 50, and that has taken 56 days. So that is from the date of initial investigation to the time that a report is produced to the monitoring officer. Again, you might say, well, that's a long time, that's 2 months, but that involves us contacting each of the witnesses and the complainant and the subject member, getting together a schedule for them to be interviewed and drawing up the reports. Most of that time is usually spent trying to organise and interview each of those witnesses. It does take a lot of time. It's a lot of time to organise, but also to ensure that their views are captured and that they are reflected within the report. I think I'll pause at that point, Chairman, if I may. If there's any questions or if James has any views he wishes to raise.
James, if you like, do you want to speak now? And you can speak later as well.
Wonderful, thank you. If I may, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Wonderful. No, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sean, for allowing me to participate on behalf of the 4 IPs today. I think we had 4 points collectively. I think in part they repeat some of what Sean said, but just from our focus, we think, one, that the report is extremely helpful in setting the scene and clearly explaining the issues, and I think it provides a good level of transparency for you as a committee and all parties concerned. 2, we think it also reflects the organised and effective team under the monitoring officer with a clear understanding of the role, remit, responsibilities, and also ensuring that complaints are dealt with swiftly for all parties, as Sean's just gone through the stats on that, and also the need to promote high standards. Three, as IPs, independent persons, we have an excellent working relationship with officers, where our views are given full consideration and fair reflection in the reports and the decisions and recommendations that are made, and these are often reflected in those reports. So our opinions are taken on board and are valued. And four, as a group, we felt that we wanted to highlight paragraphs 9 and 10 of the report because they seem particularly fundamental. And it's encouraging to see that some town and parish councils are addressing their training and governance arrangements. But from this, I think over time it's going to be interesting to see what change results by engaging in training and governance and how long this is sustained. And we also reflected that, as Sean has, that more councils probably need to be encouraged to address the training and governance arrangements to ensure that we've got the high standards across the authority, given only 4% of councils have actually got local resolution procedures. But we'd like to also agree that this can only be a benefit to the authority in the medium to long term. Thank you very much, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, James. Thank you to all the independent persons for your work. Response times of Tuesdays is pretty well. It couldn't be much better, I suppose. So thank you very much for that, and the way you're prepared to commit to that. Thank you. I think what we'll do, Sean, is we'll look at those paragraphs of 9 and 10. There's as a ward councillor myself, I attend 4 parish councils, and I'm not aware of this code of practice and the way of doing things locally. I don't know whether other ward councillors are in the same position, or whether you have heard of this code of conduct, Robert. I don't know. Aubrey. I think, Chris, you do know about it, don't you? You're down at Ross, and Lempstead does as well. So, I mean, maybe we don't need very much of a debate about it, but I think we should be pushing for this, whatever mechanism is possible. So, Sean, I mean, you tend not to communicate direct with parish councils, or they tend to be independent, really. And I don't know what ideas you might have for communicating this and getting this out. And maybe it's something which we as ward councillors can all do when we attend the parish councils. We do to get the news out about this as a possibility. But I'm open to suggestions to improve it.
Thank you, Chair. I think you're right. I think there is a very low appreciation of this civility and respect pledge. It seems to have been pushed for a number of years, but I don't know how successfully that it's been within Herefordshire. Well, with 4%, I guess not very successfully. We can, as a committee, and all of the alternative ask the monitoring officer to write to the clerks. We did that quite recently with regards to respect and drew their attention to that, and we could do so the same. So we could draw attention to this. Recommend that if they they don't have to adopt the exact pledge put forward by NALC, but it would be nice if they have something of the similar principles with the similar objectives. So it's about training, having proper training, proper governance, making sure there's proper interventions and mechanisms to kind of stop these issues and disrespect get into a critical kind of stage. So if there's something there, so I guess some of these councils might say, well, we've got this already. We've got this. This is just duplicating what we already have. So that is always a possibility. But I think from what I've heard in the room, the kind of knowledge about that does seem to be lower. and I think as a committee we could help the local association and NALC, because we said that we would discuss it with them again to see what can be done to kind of push the concept of, well, the respect point, which is, as we keep saying, is the part which keeps coming up fundamentally over and over again.
The previous communication about respect came from the MO, did it, Sean? I'm just wondering. I think I'd like some communication direct with the ward councillors, as well, so that they can actually push it at the council, their own parish council meetings.
Yeah, yes, so yeah, we can put that out again to the town clerks. We can also put that out to our local members as well, the Herefordshire members, and those with wards, and ask them to kind of consider it and see how it's been interpreted or on a local level. So that's
Okay,
that would be fine.
Chris, I did notice that if you've got this in place, unfortunately, Ross and Wise does feature in figure C rather.
I don't think anything's been upheld, has it, Mr. Chairman?
Well, I just want that. It seems that the complaints seem to be reaching a higher level, even though you've got this intermediate step. So has the intermediate step had any impact?
Chair, can I, in relation?
I don't know, because it's all confidential, obviously, but I mean, we signed up to it in Ross and Wye.
Yeah.
But I brought up the point earlier, which was has the county council communicated with all the parishes in the county? I don't know whether they have, or if they have, whether it was so long ago they've forgotten about it. And I speculated that perhaps the councils that have signed up are members of HALC, and a lot of parish councils are not members of HALC. So if it's HALC giving them some information about the respect and civility pledge, then the others won't know about it by definition.
Yeah.
And others may have heard about it or been notified about it, and they've thought, perhaps not unreasonably, well, we've got a standards regime in place run and policed by the county, which has got no teeth at all. If people wish to just ignore the recommendations, not do the training, not apologise, there's in practical terms, there's nothing anyone, including the county or the monitoring officer, can do about it. What's the point of just signing up to another bit of paper? Because there's no teeth to it, as far as I can make out.
Yeah, Mark.
One of the problems with the numbers is obviously we don't know how many issues have actually been resolved privately and in quiet by parish councils. They may already be doing something, but we would not be aware. I've got a couple of other questions, if I may, for Sean. Sean, you said that 20 days is now the benchmark for responding, potentially. But does this include responding to issues which are without merit, which are unsubstantiated? So to all, that's for all issues, is it? That are reported, all allegations, all complaints?
So it's all complaints that we've accepted. And when I say accepted, as in there are some facts there. So someone just hasn't put
so how long would it take for you to respond when you've excluded, when you've decided no, there isn't any merit to this one? How long? What's the date? What's the timeline for that?
That would be almost be immediately same day.
There wouldn't be a wait, a considerable wait, because 20 days would be, for a parish council to wait for 20 days, it could inconvenience a committee, couldn't it, and so on.
So the 20 days is when we received a complaint. We've accepted it as a complaint. We've issued the complaint to the subject member to have their views on that.
Right.
The views have been received, and then the officer has made a recommendation for the monitoring officers to see whether or not actually it can be resolved at that stage. For example, if someone's already apologised, you wouldn't take it any further. Or if you looked at it and thought, well, there's no real merit in this, there's no public interest. So it involves sharing the information, obtaining the members' views on that, and then making a judgment. So that is the 20 days. And we based the kind of 20 days, not just the fact is that we hit it, so therefore that's our benchmark. It's just that at the moment we've got the benefit of having good resource in this area that covers this, and that is the average that we're hitting. So we now know that is what we should be looking to achieve.
if I may. Thank you, Sean. So what I'm interested in is how long it takes for the council, the parish council, sort of get back into order, as it were, once the code of conduct's been done. So did the 56 days, when it comes to making a decision, that is the rough benchmark for the decision, which you says nearly 2 months, does that include the 20 days?
No.
Okay, so the overall amount of time that something that goes through to a full investigation, to the monitoring officer, to the whole thing, is potentially 3 months.
Yes.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Any other questions? Sean, we do now have this system where once a decision is made, it's communicated to myself and two other people on the committee. I must confess I've been surprised that they've all been dealt with by the time we have this communication. I was expecting there to be some apologies needed and all that kind of thing. Is some action being required? I don't know whether anybody else who gets these regular updates, whether you have any comments on that. Robert, are you one who receives the regular Wednesday? Are you? Do you have any observations on that, or? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Sean. Yeah.
Because obviously we've made that change quite recently, and we have to remember that decision making at that stage is for the monitoring officer. The purpose of the sharing with the panel was to see for the panel to be aware exactly what the activity is, how much work is coming, but actually what our decisions are. So it's not about that individual one, but if the panel starts to see lots of what you consider to be quite serious stuff suddenly being dismissed as kind of not in the public interest, that's probably when you would then get in touch with us and go, well, what's going on here? You know, this clearly was quite important. Well, can I have more information about that? So the delegation for that decision remains with MO, and once it's done, it's done. So it's just to make sure that you as members, having with more of your strategic oversight hats on, can see, well, have more of an issue, more understanding what the officers are doing, but also satisfying yourself that the decisions are within the range of what you consider to be a reasonable decision.
Yeah. I suppose I'm not asking you to start having more referrals or anything like that, but it was just having these coming quite regularly is really helpful. But the trend seemed to be that nothing needs to be done any further. So you've had an apology, or it's outside the jurisdiction. Sean, I don't think we need to go there. I mean, one of the comforting things is, James, you're involved in these cases, and it's a comfort that I think in almost every case I read, the independent persons have been approached, and they agree with the decision. So there's a good element of assurance that I think we get from your involvement.
Yeah, Chair, if you don't mind me coming in on that, I think you can take a little reassurance on that, because we don't always agree, and I think that is our role. And Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, that what would be reasonable to a member of the public, following the recommendations made in the initial report by the monitoring team. So we do challenge and we do have debate, but the team are receptive to a fair scrutiny.
Thank you, James. Okay, Sean, do you want to deal with Appendix 2?
Okay, Chair. So the second part of the report is in relation to the government's consultation on standards. So you may recall that this committee wrote to the Secretary of State in the summertime asking her to consider introducing a more effective standards regime with appropriate sanctions. Could be serendipitous, or maybe we had a response. But so the government is now consulting on that. Part and parcel of that is what are the appropriate sanctions, and what would we recommend. And so we've asked all councillors to respond to that consultation directly, so personally, and we have prepared a council response back to the government, which will sit with this committee. And of course the response was initially drafted by officers, but we have consulted with group leaders and we have consulted with the members of this committee by email, asking for comments and any changes, and they have fed into what we put together in the response in Appendix 2. There were lots and lots of comments, all very relevant. We kind of included a lot that we thought could be affected by the legislative change, but there was a lot of things which are we're hoping that will be a personal local change for us. So, for example, they have asked us, should there be a national code, and we said yes. But also we've said that we would like a local discretion to add our own changes into that, which we've done with the LGA Code of Conduct. So we've done that with our existing code. So, Appendix 2 is the proposed response. It's in bold writing in Appendix 2. There's 40-odd questions we've responded to, and the recommendation is that that this committee authorise that response and that we respond to the consultation as set out. The main points, I'll just run through quickly the main points of what our our response to the Secretary of State is. As I just said, we agree that it should be a national code with the local amendments. We agree there should be a standards panel. Quite amazed that we have to be asked that, but I am aware of councils that have operated without a member standards panel. We've recommended the current status of the independent person should remain as it is. As I think you probably understand, we really value their input into things, and we wouldn't want to see that change. So we've kind of recommended that that should remain. We've also recommended that standards panels have the power to co-opt further members of the public if necessary, but we've said that it shouldn't be mandatory. It should be just for us locally to decide that. Further recommendation is that only breaches should be publicised. We've requested more sanctions, included the power to suspend up to 12 months. We've included that the standards panel should have the power to suspend, but also the power to reduce a suspension. For example, if other sanctions are complied with. So if there's a training sanction and someone completes that, then there could be a reduction in the suspension, any suspension sanction. So that was a good idea. We have agreed that it should be the ability to have an interim suspension in very limited circumstances. So we would talk about the similar in an employment law where it must be necessary for, and we've asked that a suspension could be not just for, you can't be a councillor for a town, but you couldn't sit on a particular panel or you couldn't go to a particular office, that type of thing. It'd have to be very very distinct to the actual the issues of the accusation at that point. There is a suggestion that there is a third body, and the government has kind of thrown it open. In that third body could actually be a sanctions body, or it could be an appeal body. They haven't really specified, but our recommendation is that yes, we think there should be an appeal body, a third party, for if we've not done our process correctly. So we've said that's a good idea, but also that it shouldn't be a body for an appeal on the facts. So once the committee, the standards committee has made its decision, it shouldn't be the ability to have a rehearing again. So it is an appeal body, but only on process and only on the actual sanctions. So, you know, if we started putting 12-month sanctions on everybody, that's probably, as you can imagine, that we only should ever do that in the most extremes of circumstances. But what we've said is that any sanction what we've recommended, any sanction more than a suspension of more than a month, then that appeal body could then consider that sanction. So that the last final point is that we wouldn't want that third party body to be recreating what happened before 2010. So we understand that there's some of the issues in the Standards Board for England were about timeliness and turnaround, that type of thing, but we want to have the ability to do our investigations left with the council to determine what are the appropriate levels of resources to be put in that. You know, if councillors think it's too slow, put more resources into it. So rather than try to recreate something that was there before, we would like this body to have a limited remit around appeals and appeals on process and sanctions. Thank you, Chair.
John, thank you. Does anybody want to comment? No, I see no. I think, Sean, I'm impressed with the work the officers have done on this, the wording. I think they've got under the skin of the idea. So thank you to you all for putting this together. We desperately do need some sanctions, and I hope the government will hear that. I was quite pleased with the appeal process, that it's not overburdensome. I think if you're going to have a rehearing, I think it could go on and on and on. It needs to be brought quickly to an end, and not overburdening the officers with lots of appeals. So I think there are no comments, so I will put this to the vote, if I may. So the first part of the report is just for noting, so we don't need to vote on that, but we do need to vote on this second part. So so having considered the report and recommendations set out in the report, the committee formally approves the draft response to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government as set out in Appendix 2. Could you all show in favour? Thank you very much. So we'll move on to item...
Chairman, sorry.
Yes.
We will take the action point in relation to the Civility and Respect initiative as well.
Thank you, Sean.
Mentioned about writing to the ward councillors and the town and the clerks.
Great, thank you very much. Okay. So item 8, update on finance and contract procedure rules. Rachel, this is over to you, I think.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of the report is to provide an update on the contract procedure rules and financial procedure rules and guidance notes. So these were last reviewed by this committee in January 2024. We've made some updates to reflect required legislative changes due to the Procurement Act and procurement regulations which come into force next month, as well as some changes in job descriptions through the financial procedure rules. So we've provided a high-level summary of those changes at paragraph 12 for the financial procedure rules and at paragraph 10 for those contract procedure rules. I've got colleagues here with me today from the legal team and the commercial services team to answer any questions. We don't propose to get into the details of any of the specific contracts that the council manages, but this is our overarching framework around that contracting and procurement activity to provide assurance to you as a committee that we are compliant with those new legislative requirements.
Thank you. Robert.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. I had some questions a year ago on this topic, and my concerns back then, which you did answer, were about small contracts and the ability of contractors to get on a list that would enable them to tender for smaller jobs, and the necessity of trying to see that we could give as many people a chance as possible to demonstrate that they could give us a good value work. And as I say, particularly on the smaller jobs where we, because of the risks on big jobs, we have to do a lot of background checks to make sure that they're going to be capable. But on smaller jobs, we can cut the checks a bit because the risks are lower and maybe gain an advantage in getting some cheaper work done. You did answer that to a degree, I think, a year ago. But could you just say a few more words about that and how that system can be made to work to our advantage?
Through you, Chair.
Yeah.
So I'll provide a bit of high-level information, then I might ask my colleagues to kind of step in and provide that detail. And I think the response that we provided last year remains unchanged. So in order to engage those smaller suppliers, some of those local suppliers, that relies on that good engagement early on, and that communication and sharing of information. And I think Carrie could probably provide a bit more information about how we do that. But also, you're absolutely right, it's about making sure that the requirements through the tender process are proportionate to the size of the contract, to make sure that it's not an administrative burden, it's not prohibitive to those local smaller businesses, to ensure that we can engage with those tradespeople, those smaller businesses, support the local economy. One of the things that we've implemented this year is the priority supplier payment programme. Might have that wrong, but the general principle is that we work with local suppliers and small suppliers to pay them quicker, and at a certain threshold we don't take a fee for that, but at a reasonable threshold we take a reduction in the contract value to recognise that early payment. But for small suppliers we do that straight away. So again, that's part of our measures to encourage local economy and to encourage that engagement from suppliers. But Carrie, I don't know if you can add anything in terms of market engagement.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. So the new regulations do encourage greater pre-market engagement. So there's a requirement to actually engage with the market, and we have to be quite clear about what we have done, what activity we've undertaken as part of a procurement process. So we have to publish notices to say what engagement we've undertaken as part of a process. So that through those mechanisms we would try to engage as much as we could with local suppliers to get them on board and get them ready and feel ready to be able to submit a tender when the time comes. So we'll continue to work with local suppliers to make sure that they can bid for those opportunities. We publish a procurement pipeline on the council website. So the requirements for publishing those kinds of opportunities is set at around 2 million. However, we actually publish all opportunities that will be going out to the market above £25,000. So hopefully that would encourage local businesses to apply for some of the smaller contracts that they feel able to deliver more locally. I think Rachel's already touched on as well, making sure that our approach is proportionate. So making sure that our evaluation criteria and the way that we structure our procurements is proportionate to what it is that we're buying. We're not over specifying or making it difficult for local suppliers to meet criteria that just isn't relevant and proportionate for that contract. So, that includes making sure that insurances are set at the right level, that we're not over specifying any standards that aren't really required where they're not needed. We also obviously make sure that we provide as much constructive feedback as part of the tender process as well, to help local businesses improve when they're tendering for future contracts. So again, as part of the regulations, there's a requirement to publish greater detail in terms of that feedback that we provide from tenders. So hopefully that will give local suppliers an opportunity to reflect on where they've scored well, perhaps where they need to improve. And we're always available, I think, to have conversations with people afterwards as well, just if they've got any concerns or there's anything they want to discuss in a bit more detail to help there. So, and it's just making it easier, I think, for them to get themselves ready. So this was actually in last year's rules anyway, but we included a 15-day working day tender period time for contracts that are advertised, so to ensure that local companies don't have the big bidding teams, that they have sufficient time to actually respond to opportunities rather than just expecting a quick turnaround of a week or two to respond. So it's just making the process easier, simpler, reducing the amount of paperwork where we can, and making sure it's proportionate and relevant to the opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks for a very encouraging answer. In the proof of the pudding, are we getting quite a few smaller contractors winning work with the council? Is there evidence of that?
I think it depends what it is that we're actually buying. So yes, there are still local companies that that are still bidding for work, particularly in the more of the construction area, or minor works, I should say. So yes, they are still bidding. I think there's work that we can do still to encourage other companies and look at opportunities and how we can actually. It might be a case of that we can look at dividing contracts into lots to make some of the works, I suppose, easier accessible for local suppliers as well. But yes, there is a mix. A lot of the contracts obviously are quite high value, so it's looking at those and what opportunities we can either encourage some of the perhaps bigger suppliers to work with local supply chain, and use local subcontractors and local, encourage that local employment side of things. If it isn't possible, to break down contracts into lots through that mechanism.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to encourage work in that direction to continue as far as you can go with that. Thank you.
Kerry.
Notwithstanding the very, very important procedures and protocols around procurement, which is there to preserve the risk and integrity of the council and their employees, do we have the capability and understanding and skills to recognise when there is a unforeseen crisis or catastrophe, where there is potential risk to life or property, where we need to cut through these sorts of regulations at speed?
There are mechanisms within the new legislation to do direct awards in certain circumstances, and one of those is the protection of life. That was obviously brought in because of COVID. So there are provisions, especially now where we have user choice, so where we do social care contracts, if the user has a choice of where they want to go to get their services, we can do a direct award in that instance as well. So there are provisions now within the legislation that does allow us to do direct awards.
Aubrey.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, you mentioned in the report tendering for contracts being through a dynamic market, membership of which would not be restricted. Could you give some more outline of what you term a dynamic market for tendering?
Yeah, a dynamic market, we have something similar at the moment, but this one is slightly different. The government tend to set them up, and they are markets that we can go to, which people join. They can just join. They will set a parameter of what type of people they want on the dynamic market, and anybody is then allowed to join. If we then want to call a contract off from that dynamic market, we have to follow the flexible procedure set out in the regulations to call off a contract under that dynamic market.
Yeah. Do you think that the council will make use of this in future contracts?
We use the CCS ones at the moment, the Crown Commercial Services ones at the moment, quite a lot. The difference will be at the moment you can do direct awards off the markets that are there in at the moment. When they are procured under the Procurement Act, we will not be allowed to do direct awards. We will have to do a competition, a flexible competition to call things off from those markets. So I'm not really sure how they will make a lot of difference, to be honest.
No. Thank you.
Just one or two questions, if I may. So on clause 10, it refers to paragraph C to changes the way goods, services and works contracts and a concessions contract are entered into, and then E, more emphasis on pre-market engagement. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on those changes which have been made.
Yes, at the moment there are quite restrictive processes that we have to follow where procurement is above threshold. Those have now been changed, and there are now only two processes. One is open, where we can invite anybody to bid, and the other one is a flexible procedure where there are just parameters and then we decide how we run our flexible procedure. There are timescales that we have to follow and notices that we have to publish to enable us to do that, but it makes a big change, and as I said, there are provisions to make direct awards as well. So there are changes to the way we do it, and hopefully it will make it easier for us to go out to procurement. With regards E, yes, there is more emphasis on market engagement. So going to the market, finding out early what it is they want from us, being able to tailor our procurement documents more so that it meets the market's requirements to enable us to get better tenders back.
Thank you. And then it talks about each contract must have a named contract manager with the right skills to proactively manage the contract. I thought that was a very good sign. How big a team do we have to do that, and how are they managed to be given the right skills?
Thank you, Chair. So contract management sits within the directorate area. It doesn't sit centrally as a function. So each director is responsible for appointing contract managers within their directorate area to manage contracts. And any officers that are dealing with procurement or contract management related activity in their role, as part of their role, should either have the requisite experience in contract management and procurement, or be appropriately trained. So the commercial services team offer both sets of training, procurement and contract management, twice yearly to those officers, so that they can make sure that they keep up to speed with the latest changes. And there's also a requirement for those officers to complete an online introduction to the contract procedure rules and finance procedure rules as well. So there's an online training module they must complete once a year to make sure that they keep themselves abreast.
So they're abreast of the procedures. Do they get training in negotiating management and that sort of negotiating skills to get the best price and service?
So we're always trying to achieve best value through our procurements, of course. We are slightly limited in terms of where we can take negotiation, but absolutely I think this is part of the early market engagement, making sure that we're working with the market to get the best solution and go out with the right solution first time, and drive through best practice and innovation through our contracts that way.
And then almost finally from me, at V it talks about contracts over 5 million, and they must have 3 KPIs published and an annual report produced and published. From discussions we've had earlier, I gather these conditions here will not apply to existing contract arrangements. So with BBLP and with the waste contract, unfortunately, this particular aspect does not apply. So do you see that as a kind of shortcoming? What can we do about introducing that into these 2 contracts, or is that just not a possibility?
There are KPIs in both of those contracts. This is just a legal requirement now for us to have KPIs in contracts over 5 million. So we do have KPIs in both the waste contract, and we will have them in the public realm contract when they go out. We won't need to publish them, as we will do going forward, but they are there.
Would we have an option to publish them if we thought that was helpful?
I'd have to look at the contract. I'm not sure what the contract says to see whether or not it's permissible, but I can't see any reason why we couldn't, no.
I don't know, do the committee feel that would be a decent thing to ask to be done? Robert, I think so. If you could take that away, we'd appreciate that. And Jenny, if you could minute that. I think I've got one. I'm just trying to think in my brain. I've got one sort of supplemental. So it is the case sometimes that the contracts get placed, and in the terms of BBLP and their annual plan, that something is then agreed. But within a month, it's found that it's not quite appropriate. How are those sorts of amendments dealt with within the rules?
Well, in the waste contract that we've got now, there are provisions within it to vary the KPIs as we go through the contract, and we're working on making sure that the KPIs that go into the public realm contract will have that similar mechanism, because where these contracts are for a number of years, obviously the requirements and the measures that we want to measure those performance by will change over time. So on the public realm contract, we're looking at that as well. I'm also working on our template contracts that we use on a day-to-day basis to update those, and there's performance monitoring going into all of those contracts now. It's quite a difficult task because obviously these contracts are used for a vast number of different procurements across the council, so it's trying to get a mechanism that will work generically across all our contracts.
Robert?
Yes, I don't think anybody will mind me saying that enforcement is a dirty word in this council. Where people fail in their contracts to any significant degree, are we robust in our response to that?
Contract management should be an ongoing process, yes, and where it's brought to our attention, yes, we can. We've got one today that we're looking at where we are looking at performance management. So yes, it does happen, and we do hold people to account for their KPIs. Yeah.
Thank you. Frank, are you trying to ask a question, or are you?
No, I wasn't, David. Although, one thing, if you could keep an eye out for my hand,
yes,
because I cannot find the raise feature
Right.
on my phone. It's like it is on the computer, it's fine.
Yes.
On here, there doesn't seem to be the hand feature.
Okay. We'll
But
probably.
I'll
I think
sort of make
it sounds as if Rachel might be offering to.
I don't have
Oh,
You'll have to just wave, won't you?
yeah, just keep waving,
Rachel's
Frank.
going to keep an eye on me, yes, I can imagine.
Mark, over to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So, Carrie, you were saying on the that there was going to be, this would help engage more local and small suppliers, that you're going to help them get ready, and that they'll be, meeting certain criteria, best standards, all this sort of thing. On that same page 46, at the bottom, we've got our standard paragraph that we have for all our agenda items, which is environmental impact. And there it says on 16, whilst this is a procedural update and will have minimal environmental impacts, it seems to me that creating contracts with loads more suppliers, potentially loads more people, will have an environmental impact, because you're going to have to insist that maybe they have to follow standards which smaller suppliers may struggle to, whereas larger suppliers have got those in place. How are you thinking that you'll be able to cope with those environmental impacts, which may occur as an indirect result of this policy? So I can understand that for this paragraph it's not a direct environmental impact, but it's indirect, in that one of the biggest environmental impacts is going to be construction and public realm works with machinery and all that sort of new build and all that sort of work. So it is actually a big environmental impact.
If I may, I think with the public realm, they're looking at a lot more of the electric vehicles to make sure that, and also on the waste that they've taken on electric vehicles to do the rounds as well. So we do have in our procurements and in our contracts that they should reduce the environmental impact of the contract. So they should be putting in place measures to make sure that happens.
Thank you. And you're going to persist with those requirements no matter what size supplier?
It will go in the contracts, yes.
Great.
So we will make sure that they minimise the environmental impacts. I can put that in the contracts, yeah.
Is there any other questions? Robert?
Yeah, it's not a question, but just it is valuable to see that in the procurement pipeline on the website, there is pre-contract support, there's a phone number, there's an email, so people can, they're not familiar with how to get in. That's quite good. I just wondered, who is it answers the phone? Do you know?
Thank you, Councillor. So we have a central email that is monitored by all members of the team, and I need to double check that telephone number and see who is at the end of it. But I think it was one of our procurement officers that it links straight through to. So yes.
Robert, thank you. Rachel.
I just wanted to provide just a couple of bits of information relevant to the discussion that we've had. So we talked about that kind of training and contract management, and do we have the right skills in terms of that commercial activity that we need to, you know, drive the council forward. And just wanted to provide some information that that's a key part of the transformation strategy going forward, to make sure that the council is equipped and officers are equipped with the right skill set to be able to take on those commercial negotiations, and how we might do that, so that we're really able to drive out value for money or improved services in our contracting arrangements. So that's very much underway at the moment, as part of the wider transformation strategy and a new commercial strategy. Also wanted to provide assurance that through the work that our external auditors do in respect of value for money, that's a separate piece of work to the detailed review of the financial statement, but one of the core principles of that is around the 3 E's, so delivering economy, effectiveness and efficiency through our resources, and the key element of that work is around contract management. The last couple of annual audit letters, which is the summary of that value for money work, highlight that we have good contract management arrangements in place. I think last year they specifically looked at the waste contract, and they had made some positive statements around that activity from cradle to grave, and they'll continue to look at some of those high profile, as well as I expect a sample of our contracting arrangements as part of that ongoing work.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. We probably drifted a little bit more into the detail than we should do, but and things like the waste contract can be looked at by other scrutiny committees. But I think it's quite difficult to understand all the detail of the rules, and I don't think we're expected as a committee to look at that. We do have the assurance from the officers that the amendments have been made, and the assurance you've just given us now, Rachel, about internal audit as well as external audit, actually making sure the procedure rules are being followed. And I think we do have a clean bill of health on that last year, and hopefully that will continue. Thank you. If we can have a sort of vote. So we're having considered the recommendations in the report, the committee approves the changes to the parts of the Constitution, being the contract procedure rules at Appendix 1, the financial procedure rules at Appendix 2, and the financial procedure rules guidance notes at Appendix 3. All in favour, show by hand. Thank you very much. We'll continue with the next one and then probably have a break. So annual governance statement progress update. Rachel, this is you again, I think.
Thank you, Chair. So the annual governance statement is a document that's prepared as part of the statutory accounts process. It forms part of that statement and is subject to audit procedures as part of the year-end process. It's a statement that reviews the internal control environment and governance framework, and it does so by reference to the 7 core principles of good governance as outlined by the SIPFA framework. In the annual governance statement, against each of those key principles, we identify what governance arrangements we have in place, and we confirm to the committee and to members, and as part of a self-assessment, whether those arrangements have been effective during the year, to inform the overall assessment of our framework at the year end. What we also do through that statement is identify areas where we could strengthen our governance arrangements, taking a snapshot of the activity that has been delivered through the year. So this report is the first time we've brought an update on those areas that we believe we could strengthen. So included at Appendix 2 is the 23-24 annual governance statement, where we outlined a number of areas that could be strengthened. In Appendix 1, we've provided an update against each of those areas of improvement, linked back to the core principle that they relate to confirm the activity that we have already undertaken in this financial year, and where there is activity that might still be carried out in the final few months of the year, or indeed is part of a year-end type of activity. So this provides an update to give you some assurance that governance is an ongoing part of the work that we do. It's not just a year-end exercise where we take a view on whether it's been effective for the sake of the annual governance statement. It's part of our culture and the work that carries on every day.
Yes, thank you, Rachel, for making that point. This isn't the final report. This is just an interim thing, and it means the report isn't just stuck in a drawer and left for 12 months, but it is looked at during the year. There are some actions here. I've seen there's a reference to additional training, changes to the constitution, the shareholder committee, the appointment of an independent expert on our own committee. Anybody got any questions? Are we just pleased to note some progress on this?
Councillor Corthwaite, Chair.
Frank.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, it sounds as though Rachel herself has the overview of this, everything that's said in the report. Am I correct, Rachel, and that you must have quite a sizable team backing that up, because obviously there's lots in the report which is really good. But my question had been, before you gave it, was how on earth you kept on top of it, really, and who kept on top of it. But I guess it's your head. Am I right?
Sadly not. I'd like to take credit for all the activity that's been delivered in contributing to our governance framework. And actually, when we bring the annual report in May to advise on our assessment of the governance arrangements, we include in that report how the annual governance statement is built up. So it isn't just led by finance and a report that's written by me. It's an assessment that incorporates heads of service reviews, director sign off. We have an assurance statement that each head of service and director is required to complete. So it's not a Rachel or a finance assessment of the controls in place. Separately, that annual governance statement then is reviewed by CLT, the corporate leadership team. But the annual governance statement is informed by a variety of different sources. So it's informed by the head of internal audit opinion, by our risk management framework, and by this assessment of that governance framework referenced back to the SIPFA principles. So it really is a whole council document, because we're all responsible for delivering good governance. It's just that I hold the pen, so to speak, in preparing that, because it forms part of the statutory accounts.
Thank you, Rachel.
Anybody else? Questions? Rachel, I noted in particular the work that's still being done on the risk management strategy. I mentioned that here just because it's in here, and it's the following item on the agenda. So it's good to see that that's being noted. I think I will just note that this there's no requirement to vote on this. The committee notes the progress made to improve government arrangements. So if we could just minute that, please. And then we'll move on actually to item 9. No, I'm behind myself. Number 10, update on risk management arrangements. Rachel, this is a bit of a frustration for you. It's a frustration for me, for the committee, that we haven't made a bit more progress with the risk sort of matrix. But I think you're going to let us know that you had a meeting this morning, presumably made really good progress, and we're looking forward to the full report at the next committee meeting. Over to you, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you. So just to remind committee members that we presented back to this committee in September a proposed draft risk management strategy. We'd updated that following recommendations from some external risk advisors, and we'd incorporated their recommendations around best practice. And we brought that back to this committee, recognising that there were 2 elements within that strategy that we needed to go away and do some work to complete. And that was around determining our risk appetite and refreshing and updating the corporate risk register, having considered that risk appetite. Unfortunately, we've not been able to do that until recently. And I just want to clarify that that doesn't mean that risk management activity doesn't take place within the council, because it takes place at directorate level as well as through the corporate leadership team. This is about a strategic refresh of our approach and a timely review of the items that are included in the corporate risk register and consideration of their relevance going forward. So we engaged the support from our internal auditors, SWAP, and their risk expert. And this morning, SWAP hosted a risk management workshop for corporate leadership team. And I think Amy can share her thoughts later, and hopefully they are similar. But we had a really valuable discussion this morning through CLT. We had a really healthy debate. It was a really engaged workshop, a 2-hour workshop. And as well as an update on some theory, which was really valuable. We had a discussion around risk appetite and tolerance, and we considered that in the context of the council plan and the priorities of the council plan around people, place, growth and transformation. And we discussed whether our appetite would be different within each of those areas. And an example that I'll give is around transformation. So we discussed whether our risk appetite in the priority of transformation might be a little bit different to our risk appetite in terms of the people priority, and also whether our risk tolerance within that risk appetite in each of those themes might be a little bit different. So as an example, within transformation, we might have quite an open risk appetite, recognising that there are opportunities that we need to take advantage of to achieve our goals in that realm. But specifically within transformation, we might have a different tolerance level around AI, artificial intelligence, recognising that it's an emerging technology and we might want to just exercise a little bit more caution. So we reached a really good place today in terms of determining our risk appetite across each of those themes. Our next steps then will be twofold. So one of the resulting conversations that we had today was about how we now distill and share and inform colleagues across the organisation of that risk appetite in order to empower officers in their decision making and activities to embody that general risk appetite, that strategic risk appetite. And we have plans to do that through our leadership group, through some additional training and information sessions to ensure that directorate activity is consistent with that strategic approach. Separately then, what we also need to do now is to review the corporate risks and to consider in whether they are, consider the risk appetite and what that means for the corporate risks that are included in that register. So if we have a more open risk appetite in respect of transformation, we need to make sure that the risks included in the corporate risk register are proportionate and that we've got appropriate mitigations linked to that risk appetite. So it was a really useful session today to join up some of that thinking, to align it to the council plan, to the delivery plan, and to make sure that the activity and that tone set at the top is distilled now through directorate risk registers and the risk management activity that takes place as part of our everyday work. So the report that we've got today outlines a proposed timeline of activity. We were conscious that we have brought a report a couple of times now where we've said, you know, watch this space, we'll bring something back. So we've brought a timeline here that you can hold us to account to, with planned activity through February and March. And one of the actions following the workshop today was to book in some dates. We talked about that being a weekly agenda item over the remainder of the financial year, to kind of maintain that priority and focus on the items that we need to complete now to get this to a good position. But we also recognise that risk management is going to be dynamic, and as we are changing our approach and strategy, that we will need to keep it under review to make sure that the new strategy and the impact on the corporate risk register means that we've still got an effective risk management process in place. And sometimes the only way that we can do that is to live through the monitoring and management of those risks once we've defined the strategy. So the timeline outlines that we'll undertake that activity in February and March, and I can confirm that is planned activity. That's not a general. We hope we might do it. That will be planned through the CLT agenda, and then a proposal that we will bring back that finalised risk management strategy to share with you the results of the workshop, the risk appetite, the tolerance levels to Audit and Governance Committee for approval in March 25. What we also talked about today was some standing risks. So I think we've received some challenge through this committee before, about how we are aligning our risk management to the overall strategic objectives of the organisation, but also how are we considering those wider risks that might be common to other local authorities and some of those wider national risks, for example, cybersecurity. So we will bring that thinking together, aligning the council plan with some of those standing items that don't necessarily have a direct link to people, place, growth or transformation. What we have separately then through March to May as we prepare that annual governance statement, we will do a self-assessment anyway as part of that process of the effectiveness of those risk management arrangements. So I think we've made really good progress today, really engaged all of the corporate leadership team in confirming that engagement and responsibility for risk management across the organisation. But happy if Amy's got any thoughts to add as to the outcomes today.
Yes, Amy, do you want to comment? Yeah.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Chair. That was a very, very good update, Rachel. I'm not sure I've got much to add. I agree with you. I think it was a really, really beneficial session this morning, and I think it really the engagement was great. There were a couple of conversations about whether we should be risk averse, risk seeking, and I think that dynamic conversation as to where the council wants to be, that's great, isn't it? You know, if one's saying risk averse, one's saying risk seeking, this is what we need to do to get that on paper. I think what the council are probably very good at the moment is identifying risks operationally and where they need to escalate. You see that coming up. I think what the conversation did today was probably push more of a thinking of the council have outlined their strategic objectives and what we want to achieve. What's going to stop the council doing that? What are those risks? And then, like Rachel said, what is our appetite for that? And I do think that spending the time doing this now will almost lay the foundation for everything going forward. So when big decisions are being made and when, governance comes up, if you've got that risk appetite, it's quite clear what the council's sort of parameters are then. And all the while thinking of what the council wants to achieve. So note the session this morning was great, the engagement was great, and looking forward to seeing it sort of documented down, really.
Good. Pete, so from a cabinet perspective, I think you were probably going to say something about that. So, it's risk management, it's the executive team, it's the cabinet and audit and governance kind of fitting the three very much working together, but you aren't specifically named in this timetable at the moment. But I'm sure somewhere in between, all that lot, there is the cabinet.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. Well, as a management risk practitioner, I have to say I'm very pleased. We've spoken at length over the last 18 months. It's really impressive now to see that we're making such good steps forward. I particularly like that risk strategy that Jessica put out late last year. It's very good. Of course, the great thing from my perspective, we've now got a simple likelihood and impact matrix. So we're getting the same approach taken by risk managers at all levels, using that sort of thing. But I'm also very pleased to see SRO, the senior responsible owner, starting seeing names around. So individuals, corporate directors are very much aware that they're responsible for projects or tasks, and that they ultimately are the end result. They own they are the final call. So I'm very, very pleased to see it go forward. And as you say, whilst Cabinet's not actively involved, we are very pleased to see it progressing, and we'll watch with interest. Thank you.
Will there be a presentation to Cabinet before it comes to us as a committee?
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the things we talked about today. So again, as part of that informing and sharing and making sure that we're all aligned and in agreement of that risk appetite, and also in terms of those cabinet priorities, understanding that if we do have a more open or seeking appetite for risk, that supports cabinet in their decision making and future priorities. One of the areas that didn't touch on that I think is important, because it's great to put the strategy in place. It's great to do all of this, but the real value in this is in the management and monitoring of risks once we've established the strategy. And we looked around some really good examples today around how we might present those risks to support that management information. We saw a couple of examples of different ways to present that, some more pictorial versions, because I'm keen that we don't have lots of dots on a square that then never moves, and each quarterly update, it's about how are those risks being managed, but I think we can present that in some quite innovative ways now, to make it a more meaningful document, both for internal management but also as an assurance tool, to provide information to this committee and to cabinet.
Yes, Pete.
And of course, what you will begin to start see as lots of documents come out, the risk matrix that normally sits at the bottom of the papers for discussion, I think you'll see in the value, the richness in those risks being explained and managed much more better, and actually giving out to all members the confidence that the administration is in control and is running these things.
Great. Well, that's music to my ears. It's the culture, isn't it? It's really important. It's not. It mustn't be driven by the process, but people must realise that risk is actually a good thing to identify, and it improves the quality of the decision making. To what I think in the administration that Liz and I headed, we look very much at the risk to the county, not just to the council, but things which might be outside the council. So it's not all about the council. It's actually about the county as well. And if I can give an example, just to understand whether you're going to be taking this sort of thing into account. I mean, there are currently threats to the farming community. How is that potentially has an effect on us as a council? So is that sort of thing something which you will be, which will feature somehow in this, or is it going to be more, if you like, introverted and looking at the council? Pete, you look quizzical.
So, Chair, you mentioned farming. So that's one thing I would imagine sits very much in the strategic risk register, because we're such a rural county. What is the impact on farming on certain government's policy? And that's the sort of thing that will go through, held at the CLT and Cabinet. What do we believe the risk is, and how do we intend taking it forward? Without being political, it's a case of what are we doing? As you say, it's real things, and these are we've now got the procedures and the policies in place and the tools to actually now start making these things a more applicable street risk register.
Yeah, and I think the prosperity or otherwise the farming community has such an influence on us as a community. Rachel.
Yeah, just to note that whilst we're aligning it to those core principles of the council plan, the underpinning theme across all of those principles is partnership working, and that's joining up all of the relevant bodies across the county, and making sure that we are considering risks. So that will be a feature of this strategy and the corporate risk register.
Yeah, Rachel, that's very encouraging. I know the chief executive does meet with these other bodies, but it's a mutual thing. It's all very well us putting our hat in the ring, but the other partners do have to join in with that and work with us. Was that very political? I don't know. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. My concern is that you get sometimes an unbalanced risk management system, because we have a tendency to gravitate towards those risks which we understand, that a risk appetite can be a complex issue, and we also know that if it hasn't got a KPI, it's not being measured, and it could fall off the radar. I mean, what assurance can you provide that the risk that the CLT has been looking this morning, for example, into this, making sure there's enough attention given equally to, for example, the core principles? governance ones. So we've got our core principles A, B, and C, which fit into the county plan, which fit in. They all merge together. That it's being distributed equally, and so you can tell my interest would be in having suitable risks which are concentrating on environmental impact, because as a council we agreed that we're in a climate crisis, and yet I don't see much of that because it's hard to measure. I understand, because we tend to shy away from it because it's so difficult to understand the impact. We understand the impact of flooding, and maybe with the comment on on farming and working in partnerships with farmers, they could be interpreted. So rather than interpreting them just as economic risks or social risks or public realm risks, it may be we give some emphasis towards the environmental risk, because they're probably in there. They're probably in the risk register. They've just all been clumped in the financial bit because it's easier maybe than to spread them out and make a balanced risk management system.
Yeah, thank you. Really good question. I'd say this morning was a difficult session. Difficult in that it was challenging some of our assumptions and our understanding. And as a CLT, we worked really well together in kind of breaking through that uncomfortable bit to get to the other side. But what I would say about that alignment to the council plan, one of the things we talked about is that separation of those strategic risks, the corporate risks, the standing risks relevant to those, but also the operational risks. And sometimes we need to be strict with ourselves and make sure that the items included on the corporate risk register really are just those high-level corporate risks. But to ensure good coverage across all of those relevant risks, the council plan includes a number of objectives, and they're supported by the delivery plan. So for us, it's about joining up all of those plans and making sure that our risk activity is aligned to, as Amy said, what are the risks to us delivering those objectives. And I think that will enable us to, in the first instance, develop a broad coverage. If you look at the priorities across place and growth and transformation, each of those include an element of environmental risk. So I think that will build up a good coverage, but separately we will have a stand-back approach to consider whether across some of those themes, the more traditional themes of financial risk, cyber risk, environmental, legal risk, reputational risk, political risks, that we've captured the right elements within that corporate risk register. So I think we're opting for a bit more of a forward-thinking approach and not just putting an item on our risk register because it's on a standard risk register. We want it to be relevant to the ambitions and the priorities of the council plan, balanced with is there anything that is that more traditional standing item? And we did have a look at a list of those standing items today, so probably some of those items that I've listed, financial risks, they're embedded within everything that we are hoping to deliver through the council plan. But having one item on there doesn't really support risk management aligned to each of those themes. So it will be an interesting process now to see how we translate the activity and the aspirations this morning into a strategy at defining that risk appetite, but also a meaningful corporate risk register that enables us to effectively manage and monitor those risks going forward. And I have lots of thoughts in my mind about how we will do that. We just need to make sure that we translate that and get the agreement and do that in a consultative approach.
Aubrey, did you have a question or comment?
Thank you, Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, I would like to mention two rather economic risks I see coming up, and how it will affect the council's entire programme. Risk one is that cost of social services is going to increase substantially over the next 2 years, and that could blow our budget to smithereens. Secondly, due to the low birth rate, declining birth rate, in about 4 years' time, the number of children coming into our schools coming into our primary schools will be about 1/3 less. And that again has a tremendous effect on the schools' budgets. Can you have you looked at this and how it might affect everything?
Rachel, I'm sure you could talk for ages about that, but if
Happy
you
to
could
answer
be
that
fairly
briefly.
briefly, thank you.
And some of those risks are managed through our revenue budget process and the medium-term financial strategy. So specifically those social care risks, we've highlighted that as a high risk through that process, and you'll see those documents come through to full council next Friday. But in terms of mitigating that risk, Scrutiny Management Board last week asked some valuable questions around the plans within the service to manage that emerging demand in the social care sector, particularly within adults, and Cabinet accepted that they would bring a report back to provide an update on that planned activity. But from a financial risk perspective, we've set a realistic and robust budget for adults services in the Community Wellbeing Directorate. And we have done that by considering the in-year cost pressure and the likely impact of demand growth and the direct impact of employers' national insurance, etc., on our social care contracts. So we've set a realistic and robust budget, and that will come to full council for approval. And that's been through the scrutiny process and been to Cabinet twice. Separately, we have also established a budget resilience reserve. Cabinet approved the transfer of £11 million from the business rates risk reserve to a budget resilience reserve back in November, and that reserve will exist to support and mitigate those risks of emerging demand in future financial years. What we also have in the next year is a review of funding, and that will hopefully central government funding, the distribution, etc., fair funding review, and we hope that that will provide more clarity on our medium-term planning period and enable us to respond to those emerging pressures. Sorry, I said I was going to be brief. Oh.
No, that's fine. We'll go into a bit more detail when we see the information in the end of March, I think, Aubrey. Okay, so I think...
Yeah. Thank you for your detailed response. Could I just ask, in relation to the employment of the external risk management company, do you feel you've benefited from that and it justifies the fee you'll have to pay to them?
So just to clarify, we didn't pay a fee to the external risk management company. That's part of our insurance arrangement. So they provided that free of charge. We get that as part of our annual contract. And the services that the SWAP have provided today have been part of our overall arrangement with them. So no additional fee, but I do think we got value from both inputs from that external advice perspective.
Good, thank you very much. Hopefully that was a useful discussion. I think there's no decision to be made, but just happy for the minutes to note that we have considered the report at some depth. Thank you very much. I'm proposing a short break, if that's... Yes, I think that's generally what... so we'll resume again in 8 minutes at 20 to 4. Thank you. Can the live... It's back on. Thank you. All right, thank you very much. Welcome back. And we now move to item 11, which is the Anti-Fraud, Bribery and Corruption Annual Report. The officer who deals with this is going to report remotely. Jonathan, I don't know whether you want to start, if you're there.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Yeah, great, excellent.
Can you hear me? Yeah, brilliant.
Yes, yep.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members. So, yeah, I would like to present the annual fraud report, which covers the previous calendar year of 2024, to provide committee with an update of the counter-fraud activity that has been undertaken across various services, which includes corporate fraud, parking enforcement, information security, and recently added to the report is trading standards as well. During 2024, I note a further increase in the number of corporate fraud referrals that has been continued to be an uptrend over the past 3 years. And whilst this increase is positive in many ways, as it shows confidence and accessibility in our reporting systems, it can also pose a challenge due to the increased volume of work on resources allocated to respond. Further challenges faced in 2024, for example, understanding how the fraud risks continue to develop across the organisation, such as the ever-increasing evolution and adaptation of artificial intelligence, which we've already touched base on in previous conversations, and the risks associated with this emerging technology being utilised by bad actors. Despite these challenges, I can proudly report to committee a number of key positive outcomes that are summarised in section 5 of the report. This includes a 96.5% success rate of all staff completing fraud awareness training throughout the year, a rise in our collective efforts to prevent fraud from occurring, and a significant collective value of counter-fraud activity across enforcement services, which both the council and its residents stand to benefit from. In this report, two new strategic pillars in deter and protect have been added. These aim to capture and report to the committee some of the key existing measures that the council has in both deterring fraud and protecting its local residents from the risk of fraud. So I'll therefore stop at this point, Chair, and just I'll take the report as being read by the committee, and I'll do my best to answer any questions that members have, please. Thank you.
Jonathan, thanks very much. It's a very full report. It's very readable. I went on the links and number 8, the media engagement, and I was pleased to see some sort of real live things that is interesting. And those fit in the category of really supporting the wider community of Herefordshire rather than just the council itself, and I like that aspect. Just one question to kick off. In the key performance summary, you mentioned 96.5% of employees complete the training. There's an increase in fraud alert circulated across services. So complaints and issues about fraud, do they come from mostly employees, from councillors, or from members of the public?
So the large percentage of referrals come through external means. Usually there's a number of ways in which a referral can be made. It could be through our online postal referral. It could be an online form. It could be through our fraud hotline. And we do have that function available to all internal staff as well. We do find that the vast majority of referrals utilise our anonymity option, and we have that available for to increase the opportunity to kind of submit a referral. I think it sometimes can put people off to make a referral if they have to provide their personal details. So we do find that is utilised quite frequently.
Thank you. Robert.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and thanks for the report there. It's a good report, and it's very comprehensive and it's readable for such a complex subject. I'd like to highlight or to focus on two areas. The new referrals, clearly they're about council tax and benefits, which is the biggest increase, and in grants, which is not only a large number, it's a very big increase on before. First of all, talking about benefits, one of the problems with benefit fraud is that it's often not exposed. And one of the most common ones is people complaining that they can't function because they've got long COVID. And doctors are signing them off on long-term benefits on sick because there doesn't seem to be any way in which they can naysay the claimant. Have we got any progress whatsoever, either through the police, through the welfare authorities, in reducing the amount of fraudulent benefit claims, which I accept are very difficult to prove are fraudulent? That's the first question. Maybe you could answer that one first.
Yeah, thank you. So it's recently, I say recently, throughout the last 12 to 18 months, we've got a joint working agreement with the Department for Work and Pensions in place. So we recognise that benefit fraud doesn't just affect local authorities; it often affects welfare benefits as well. So there's often the case where fraudulent applications or undeclared circumstances or a variety of different scenarios might occur against the council tax reliefs, exemptions, discounts, but also in the welfare system, so universal credit, housing benefits and things like that as well. So that by joint working, we can share resources collectively between the organisations with the aim of a joint outcome and looking at the totality of the alleged fraud, not just a singular fraud against any one organisation. So that joint working approach is really, really important because the volume of cases, it can be quite overwhelming, and obviously you know, in order to get some sort of significant impact and reduce that risk, we do need to work with other enforcement agencies. So yeah, that's what we've noticed in real terms is an increase in the number of criminal investigations being jointly worked between both organisations as well, and it's benefited as well in the number of civil recoveries that's been achievable.
Thank you. Because it's notable that nationally we have over 10 million people of working age who are not economically active. In other words, they're not working and not looking for a job. And many of those are receiving health benefits, illness benefits. Do we have any idea what the statistics are for Herefordshire?
I think in terms of that, I think we'd be stemming into potentially what DWP might know more knowledge about in terms of long-term sickness leave. I think really where we jointly work and we have that sort of link to the Department for Work and Pensions is where there's been a fraudulent application to. I say fraudulent application; it could also be undeclared circumstances. When in receipt of council tax reliefs, discounts and benefits. Unfortunately, I don't think I've got any further information to add there, sorry.
That's okay, I can't expect everything from you. There's a lot in this report already. But I just would like to stress that this is an area of concern. The new referrals talk about, first of all, 237% in 3 years, and we have the figures for 1 year, which are a modest increase, but still a very high number, and a big increase in the grants in 1 year. And as for grants, there's a question I'd like to ask on that. The people who prepare the grant application forms, how skilled are they in the ways in which people could be using fraud in some way? Because some of the grant application forms I've seen are bizarre. They've hundreds of things have to be filled in, and it's almost as if the person designing the form thought, well, I'll just ask that just in case. I don't know if it's important or not, but I'll put it in there. And we get unnecessarily complicated forms that don't do their main purpose, making sure that it's all going to go through properly. So I'd like to ask if we have any specific training in fraud for the very people who create the application forms.
Yeah, thank you. So, touching base on the first accurate thing that you mentioned about the volumes that we see. It's really when we talk about sort of council tax revenues fraud, it's an inherently high risk area, and I do believe that it's not necessarily that we've seen a huge spike, that it's that the fraud's always been there. It's back in November 2023, we introduced the public referral system, and since that that was introduced, and that's the primary sort of avenue in which we detect allegations of revenues fraud. That we're just seeing it now. We're able to detect it, and we're able to have that sort of reporting avenue. And I do think, you know, as you mentioned, it's a national issue, with that being an inherently high risk area. Go into the question about grants. We again, we worked very closely with a number of high risk grant schemes across the council, to work with them at the very start, the implementation stage of when they look at the control frameworks. So they'll look at what's the risks, what's the controls that we've got in place to detect, prevent, even deter fraud, and it's as a result of that work that we've undertaken at the early opportunity that we've been able to have a significant impact in preventing, well, firstly identifying, but preventing fraudulent applications in select grant schemes. I think in terms of training, we do have a broader training, which is the mandatory fraud awareness training, which reaches all staff across the council. We do try to raise specific alerts, and we do have more targeted training for grant schemes as well. The issue that we find is that grant schemes is delivered across a number of different service areas and not by any one team. And with that comes different approaches into how they administer it. And also, further risks are in place for different schemes. For example, we've identified that reactive grants are often higher risk. So if you're reacting to COVID, if you're reacting to floods, if you're reacting to a certain scenario, often is the pressure to try to get the money out quickly. And therefore we need to make sure that that's not at the detriment to the controls that need to be in place to make sure they're administered correctly.
Thanks very much. That's all from me for now.
Yeah, I noticed for now. It's your special subject, isn't it, Robert?
Well, people assume I did work for 35 years as a police officer, but I never worked in fraud, so don't expect any more from me than anybody else.
Frank. Sorry, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Jonathan, thank you for your report. Do you find, or do you think there's any value in being able to compare your fraud prevention summary statistics, the prevention ones, against other counties of similar size, rural status as Herefordshire? Does that give you a lead into areas which may be growing, shrinking, or that may be missed?
Prevention is always a difficult question because it's quite subjective in how you calculate the value associated with prevention. I think some local authorities often calculate it differently. So you might have, in section 14 of the report, it touches on the term actual prevention and future prevention and what that means. When we talk about actual prevention, that refers to the actual value of an attempted fraud. So, for example, if you had a fraudulent grant application for a certain value, you can attribute a numerical value to that, to preventing that. But the question is, how do you calculate the value ongoing, whether it be 6 months undetected or 12 months undetected, and some local authorities calculate those differently, so it would be quite difficult to benchmark, unfortunately. What we can do is, with the National Fraud Initiative, they are calculated through the Cabinet Office, and so it's quite a generic calculation across all local authorities that are mandated to use the NFI data matching service. So in terms of the the increase in the prevention activity, I think we're on a good standing. We're definitely demonstrating that we're detecting things earlier, and through integrating systems like CIFAS, which is a fraud prevention database, in various services, we're able to kind of have that early detection and assessment of risk at an earlier stage, and not trying to react all the time to when fraud has already occurred.
Okay, yeah, thank you. My question was kind of weighted in that if another county, rural county, was having, 50 to 60 fraudulent grant applications, or they were having, 500 council tax refunds, how come ours are so low in comparison? So just what I wanted to see was not necessarily the value, but the number of fraud inquiries.
Yeah. So with breaking down the number of inquiries that we got, so majority, as you mentioned, were predominantly in council tax revenues and benefits, and that very much marries up to what we're seeing nationally and what we're seeing through any local authority that I engage with, and part of our Midlands Fraud Group, which is a hub of corporate fraud investigators that share intelligence. That's what we're seeing, across the UK, and certainly in our regional area, is that area remains a high area of referrals and cases being investigated. In terms of grants, the two areas, there's two schemes in which really that large number is assigned to, and both of those are national run schemes as well. So again, it's not that we've detected it in a locally operated grant scheme. I think there's an inherent risk associated to those particular grant schemes that we've identified high levels of fraud in.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Right, any other questions? Chris?
Could I ask what the ratio is between the cost of the counter fraud service and the amount of money you're raking in? So I'm inviting you to tell us, if you had another 10 officers, you could get in the cost of their wages plus a whole lot more. Do you have any idea of that?
I mean, there is certainly a case to be made that the more resources you have allocated, the further reach that you could have, the more proactive you could be in counter fraud activity, and also being able to deal with the influx of cases that we're already seeing as well. Unfortunately, we're not blessed with a huge team. I am the sole full-time equivalent officer that's dealing with corporate fraud, and a lot of the work I do requires collaborative working in order to get the results that I'm presenting to you today. And the argument being, I suppose, that yes, if we were blessed with the budget to kind of to recruit more, that there might be that. But I think I would like to defer the question to Rachel, if that's okay, because I can see Rachel wanting to chip in here.
Yes, I just wanted to highlight that whilst our kind of dedicated counter fraud service is a small but perfectly formed team, that is supported by colleagues across the organisation. So, for example, the finance team might support with the kind of risk assessments, etc., and advice around Companies House. And instances such as that. In addition, we've got a strong revenue and benefits team that support Jonathan. So it's part of a wider team. What Jonathan has done really well over the past couple of years is to focus his attention very much on that prevention, deterring fraud from occurring in the first instance. That's our primary goal, because you're right, it is costly to pursue and collect those instances where we know fraud have occurred. So we've got a very sharp focus on how we prevent, how we inform, how we protect our residents, to really reduce that cost. But we will continue to review the resources and that cost benefit of what are we able to recall in terms of that avoided fraud. In addition, we've got other controls in place that support Jonathan's work. So, for example, some of the work we are doing through the Reverend Ben's team is around a review of our second homes and empty properties. We do the single person discount reviews. So it's complemented by the work that Jonathan leads across a variety of different teams in the council.
Amy.
I hope you don't mind me coming in. I just wanted to sort of perhaps explain that internal audits almost further complements this again. I've had conversations with the council tax team about second homes and sharing within the SWAT partnership what are our other partners doing to sort of aid Herefordshire. So I've been speaking to the manager there, and we've got some conversations planned for the year. Probably doesn't feature in my rolling plan, it's more that sort of advisory, but certainly the chief exec at SWAT was keen to get the partners sharing and talking around that, so that it gets sort of a further assurance. And then I would say internal audit have got a really good working relationship with John. So when we start an audit, we refer to the fraud risk assessment that was completed, we look at those controls, but we do actually engage with John. So we meet with John, talk to him about the audit, the scope, and he's able to sort of, what would you call, sort of feed in what he's seeing from an investigatory point of view, from a prevention point of view, so that our actual internal audits are, they may not be specifically sort of looking for fraud or looking for the controls, but we're definitely bearing that in mind. So housing and council tax benefits, we've just started, and I know the auditors met with John to talk about some of the controls that we need to be aware of with that sort of very preventative, proactive fraud approach. So I think that's just another layer of assurance for the committee as well.
Great, thank you, Amy. Thank you, Amy. I think it's most very helpful. So I think we've considered that subject. There's no need for a vote, but if we could just minute that we have considered the report. Yeah, thank you. The next, thank you, Jonathan, very much. Thank you for your contribution.
Thank you, Chair.
It sounds as if you're not going to get a big team. But
I think the key message is prevention is the key.
Yes,
collaboration.
Yes, you're obviously very good value for money to employ. Thank you. So we'll move on now to item 12, internal audit report. Amy, this is your bit. There is a small item at the end which we will probably deal with separately, but we'll come to that before the end of this item. So, Amy, item 12.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, committee. Just ask you to bear with me with my voice at the moment on the back end of the lurgies. Just bear with me if I pause for a drink. Okay, so this is the Q3 internal audit progress report, which starts on page 163 of your pack. Like I sort of do normally, I was going to take you through sort of my key information and then open it up to questions at the end. In terms of key findings, so we've got no high organisational risks to report to you as the committee. There are 2 limited assurance audits in this quarter. Those 2 limited assurance reports have got 7 priority 2 actions. So we had 4 priority 2 actions in the use of spot purchasing non-accommodation audit, and then 3 were from the quarter protection audit, which is the exempt item. So if we focus on the use of spot purchase audit, the 1-page report for that is shown on page 173 of your agenda pack. And I can just see Zoe's just joined the meeting, so perhaps at the end of my bit, Zoe can just give some detail on that one. So I think the key finding from this review was that there wasn't really one formal process for staff to follow across the directorate in relation to spot purchasing non-accommodation activity, and perhaps it might just be useful. So what I mean by non-accommodation is everything that's not the actual foster placement. So it's not the accommodation placement. So that could be taxis, therapists, there's an array of things, but it is everything that's not that actual accommodation. So I think the audit identified there was a sort of a lack of process, and then in because there's a lack of process, there's also a difficulty in reporting and monitoring. So actually perhaps quantifying what the level of that activity is and what the value of that activity is. Each service area has got its own processes, and I was assured that the processes were there to ensure quality was achieved, value for money was achieved. I think the risk I felt was the wider directorate. Were we achieving the value for money across the directorate? And there's a risk around so silo use of a therapist, looking at the whole directorate's use of a therapist, there's a risk that procurement thresholds were being breached and so forth. It was a really good piece of work, worked really well with Zoe and Tina, the director here, and what we've agreed is that they're going to run a pilot scheme in one of the areas and push a formal process, use frameworks that will allow them to monitor and report, so we can actually start to see the level of activity, to understand, is there a potential other commissioning route? Should we have a contract in place for some of these things? So they're going to run that pilot scheme and see how that goes in one area, and then from there build on that. And I think it was also agreed as part of the review that the frameworks may need a little bit of developing to make sure that the services that the officers need to commission are available on those frameworks. So there was a bit of work there. If it's okay, I'll keep going and probably ask Zoe if she wants to come in at the end then after my bit, if that's okay. Okay, so pages 165 to 168 demonstrate the activity in this quarter. So we've got 4 audits now complete, 11 in progress, with 3 of these at draft report stage. I think what we're seeing here is probably just a little bit of lag from the Christmas break. We got a few reports out before Christmas, and it's just trying to, now we've got back, trying to get those out as final. I think since I've sent my report, one of those has gone to final, so it's just a little bit of a time lag then, nothing that I'm concerned about. Risk coverage is on page 169 to 172. And as we've heard from myself and Rachel earlier, the work continues with risk coverage. So there isn't much change there in my dashboard. I took on board the committee's feedback around the colouring, so I think it's visually better. I think what we're looking to now is, once that corporate risk register has been revisited, get back to this dashboard, update the dashboard with the corporate risks, and then I think going forward, myself and officers can best agree how we show committee why there's no coverage against the new corporate risks that we come up with, whether that be because it goes to scrutiny. But I know Rachel and I are going to work together to try and display that to you in the best possible form. Bringing me on to action tracking, we have got the backlog. I think we started around 96, 91 plus days over. We've got that down to 12. I'm really pleased with that. And the 12 that are left, if I can assure committee, they're sort of in hand. I've got a couple of meetings booked over the next couple of weeks just to sort of draw those out. I don't know if anybody spotted, there is an error in my report, so I will hold my hands up. Screenshots for you. So the screenshots of the numbers don't match to my figures, but my figures are right. That dashboard is very much a live document, and as I was prepping them, hands up, I just didn't go back and update those. But the throw myself under the bus there then, Councillor Highfield. Yeah, really pleased with all of that, and I think now that backlog has gone down, I think it'll be almost easier for committee to keep on top of the ones coming through. You'll note there were 20 with revised timescales. I've given you a brief outline in your report as to sort of why that was. And if I pick one as an example, public health, we had quite a historic audit report. Haven't done much work since, so I didn't really just want to call them historic and move on. So I worked with public health around updating those, making those something that could actually be achievable. So they're a couple that we've extended that timescale to account for that now based on the new discussions. Again, no concerns, nothing that I want to raise into committee that I don't think any of those actions are not being actioned because officers are just not doing it. I think there are a number of reasons as to why that's played out. And then finally, just the Feedback scores continue to get a high feedback score of 99%. I don't know if you'll have noticed the response rate is lower. This did get me for a little while. I was trying to figure it out. It's a 12-month rolling dashboard. So the feedback will drop off, if that makes sense. So the feedback rate might go down and up, and it's because it's an ever-moving dashboard to keep current, really. So not to be alarmed by that. I like to get the feedback. I think it's great. So often, if the officers don't come back, I will email and say this is a great opportunity for you to fill in this feedback questionnaire so that internal audit can learn from our processes. So I'll keep doing that. I think that's it from me. Happy to take questions.
Right. Yeah, any questions? Anybody? No. No. Well, let's not labour it. So there's an exempt item. Sean, what is the wording, or Jenny, that we need to use?
Chair, if there's an exempt item, there's two ways of dealing with it. You could either leave it and you wish to discuss that item, you would have to move this meeting into an exempt part of the meeting. So you can do that at the end of, once you've dealt with everything else in the open session.
Yep.
The alternative is that you move into exempt and then go back into the open session.
Yeah, we'll do the first.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So you just be tagging that to the end of the agenda.
Very end of the meeting. Okay.
So we'll need to pass the usual resolution at the end.
Fine.
And
Thank you, Sean. Okay. So in respect of this item, there's no requirement for a vote. The committee notes the report and is satisfied with the areas of activity and necessary improvements outlined. Thank you, Amy. And item 13, this is about the local audit reform response. Rachel has had an amazing amount on her plate. And and then this reform thing comes out. And as far as Herefordshire is concerned, we're up with the accounting. We've had our audit and everything, but Rachel's on a committee where an awful lot of the councils are not in that position. So she has responsibility for responding to this, not just for Herefordshire, but for a couple of other professional bodies. So she's done an immense amount of work on this in the last few days, I think, Rachel.
Yeah, so if I can just share, we always actively engage in any consultation, and I'll admit it's a particular area of enjoyment of mine. Got an audit background as well as an accounts background. Really interested in how the sector can evolve and respond to that backlog, but also particularly interested from a Herefordshire perspective about how we maintain the quality of that audit provision, and also really interested in how we can engage and influence simplification of the financial reporting regime. I think that's really important to enable to allow residents, users, members to engage with the accounts and make them more meaningful. So this consultation is in response to proposals around local audit reform and some proposed changes to the accounting regime going forward. It's a very detailed consultation. When I chatted with Councillor Hitchener a couple of weeks ago and said, yep, I'll sort this in the next couple of weeks amidst all the budget setting, didn't quite realise there were 32 multiple part questions to this consultation. So it's one of the lengthiest I've seen in a while. So Herefordshire Council has prepared a good response. Some of the elements are around whether we advocate a kind of loosening of reporting deadlines. Obviously, from our perspective, as the first and only council in the country, and I will repeat that at every opportunity, to have their accounts signed off by the statutory deadline for 23-24 and to receive an annual audit report. We're not going to advocate for that loosening of any of the statutory deadlines. It's really important that we maintain that rigour internally. We need to prepare our accounts by the 31st of May because that enables us to confirm and provide assurance over our outturn position, and we need that strong external assurance over the accuracy of our financial reporting at that time in the year to provide assurance as we move into the budget setting cycle. So we are proposing and strongly disagreeing with any proposals to move those deadlines. We're very much in favour of simplifications to the financial reporting regime and a good practical response by the audit sector, which is proportionate to the financial risks. So I have shared our response with the chair, and I'm happy to share that across members of this committee. The deadline for submission is tomorrow, and we will submit that to the relevant body. Separately, there's a further consultation, I think, due for submission in the next couple of weeks, which I will also be looking at, not just on behalf of Herefordshire, but on behalf of the Society of County Treasurers as well. And that is around the accounting code and accounting principles. So it's really joining up now. We need a good, reliable, high quality audit sector to provide that valuable assurance. But to support that practical and proportionate audit regime, we need to consider the way that we present and report our financial information.
Pete.
I'd also like just to make all members aware who may not be that, of course, Rachel and her team won a national award for financial reporting in November last year. So, thank you.
She likes doing it.
Yes. Yeah. Kerry. Yeah.
Coming from the private sector, I cannot emphasise enough the importance of closing your accounts, getting them done, getting them audited, getting them filed and moving forward. Finance is not about looking back, it's about looking forward. And if you're constantly doing 2 years ago audits, you haven't got clarity of what's happened and where you can go. So congratulations, Rachel. Stick to your guns. You know, just because other people can't keep up with you, they've got to go up a gear.
Can I just add here, very, very happy to receive all this praise, but just want to bring in Grant Thornton and Grace, who's on the call, because we couldn't achieve that that opinion by that deadline without the efforts and the commitment from external audit and their continued support in our goal to secure that assurance for members and for residents and for this committee.
And they couldn't do the audit if the paperwork and everything wasn't done on time in the right way.
Good, thank you. I've got one or two questions on here, which I've given a little bit of an advance notice to Rachel about. First of all, this is called the local audit office, and it's a total misnomer. I was thinking local, it'd be Bristol or Cardiff or Birmingham, or at least sort of localised to, it's about you as a local council. No, it's going to be an office block in the middle of London, and administered from there. That's the first comment. The second one is, I think that it says the role of the audit committee should be enhanced. So I think that's if we want to be enhanced, then that's a good sign. It mentions or questions whether the chair of the audit committee, this committee, should be independent. Kerry, with due respect to you, partly because we're much more than audit. We're governance. We're all these other things. Where I think an internal knowledge of the council is really important, and actually to chair it would be very difficult if you didn't have all that sort of knowledge. And the final thing was something which I've been thinking about quite a lot, and there are two sides to this. That the annual accounts should go to the council AGM or something like that. We have this strange system which is totally counter to private practice, to industry, and that. So council sees the budget and approves the budget, but doesn't approve the accounts. Now, in a company, the officers deal with the budget, and then the company approves the accounts. So it's just the other way around. So I can understand why they want to do that, but it would be kind of taking away from this committee specifically approving the accounts. And I think the idea of 53 ward councillors who, with due respect to them, don't have an enormous amount of financial and accounting knowledge, it's much better to have a smaller committee to look at it than to go out to the whole committee. Kerry, are you about to comment on that?
I do know that Birmingham are trying to find an independent to chair their audit committee and are struggling manfully. They just haven't got somebody who has that depth of knowledge and engagement.
We very much appreciate your being here, Kerry, and I know you're independent on other things, aren't you? Like the Blind College, is that right? Yes. Good. So thank you for that update, Rachel. I think we then move on to the work programme. We've got the shortened version in front of us. Very important meeting end of March. The risk management strategy, will spend some time on that, I think. The internal audit annual report, and I guess, Grace, we might have you talking about the audit plan. And then there are some items for the agenda on the 10th of June. Jen, were there any things we needed to be added, aware of, changed? No? Okay, well, I think with that I will call the meeting to an end. So the date of the next meeting is Tuesday, the 28th of March at 2 p.m. Oh, we've got, yes, I'm sorry, we can't bring it to an end quite yet, but the official bit we will. Sean is going to read out the necessary item.
Chair, obviously, if you don't wish to discuss the restricted item, you don't have to move into the part of the exempt bit, but if you do wish to, you can have to carry on with the meeting.
Yeah, Chairman's discretion, we do want to discuss
Okay,
it.
so it's the standard recommendation. I'll read it out quickly. Recommendation that under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds that it involves a likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in Schedule 12A of the Act, as amended as indicated below. In the fact it's information related to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding the information, and the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information.
Okay, so I think we want to comply with that. So I resolve that we go into a closed session. All those in favour? Can I propose from the chair, and then we don't need a seconder? Still do. Oh, thank you, Chris. All those in favour? Thank you. So the live feed, could that be closed, please?
Just bear with me